Hello and welcome to Communication and Collaboration Hub for your board of directors through my Microsoft 365. My name is Nathan Austin, and I'll be presenting today along with Stephanie Kingsley, who will be producing behind the scenes and answering the Q&A. So this is definitely a topic that for the majority of the audience that we typically engage with probably applies to nonprofit organizations more than it does for-profit. Not that for-profits don't have a board, but oftentimes the board is the owner. Or maybe they usually don't have as much of a formalized process until they get to be larger organizations. But this still applies to both for-profit and nonprofit organizations as far as helping have this communication and collaboration hub, especially if any of your board members are external to your organization. Okay, with that said, one of the things I always like to call out is the Q&A panel. We will be presenting about 30 minutes of content, and we'll open it up for Q&A and any questions you might have. So, keep that in mind. Go ahead and start asking questions there, and we will answer them at the end. Don't want you to wait till the end to ask. So whenever in the presentation something strikes you, please go ahead and put it in there, and we'll get to it at the end. All right, with that said, here's you know what, I forgot to change the title of this. We are going to be going into a prescriptive structure for board of director communication and collaboration. That's what this session is about. We're going to touch on common board member meeting problems that are going to be solved, and demonstration of actually building out a hub and what those pieces look like. And then we'll go into some Q&A. So with that said, just a little bit about MyTech. I always like to touch on it because these sessions are here to help our clients and prospective clients and the community as far as helping them use these tools that a lot of people are using or paying for, but they might not be using very well. With that said, we're not a training company. We work with small and medium organizations as a business and technology consulting firm. We know that over the last 20 years, we've built what we call a proven IT strategy that we know can deliver proven results for our clients and organizations with whom we work. We also understand that there are lots of challenges and problems that businesses face out there and organizations face. Not all of them are IT challenges. So our goal is just to help you remove some of the IT pieces so that you can focus on serving your customers or your constituents better and be more adaptable to those challenges that we all face in the community today. So put that all together of making IT easy and our proven IT strategy, and we know that our clients can achieve 4 times more value and productivity from their IT investments. We actually have measurements around that to show you what we're actually accomplishing together. So if you'd like to learn more about that, by all means, please give us a shout. We'd love to hear from you and have a conversation, but that's not why you're here today. We're going to talk about a communication collaboration hub for your board of directors. So let's start with common board of directors challenges. I've served on a couple of board of directors in my career. Hopefully I'll be serving on more at some point in the future. I'm not at the moment serving on any other than at MyTech. But one of the things that was a problem is oftentimes you're emailed financial information or your emailed strategic information because working with an external group of people that are comprised of lots of different organizations, the best tool that we often had available to us at the time was email. Well, the problem is that now your documents and sensitive information and financial information, at least financial summary information, are out in the wild. They're for anyone to be able to forward, print, etc. So that's one thing that, of course, you know, as a board member, you're asked to keep that information confidential. But if you're using personal email addresses like a Gmail account or things like that, well, guess what? That information is pretty much nearly publicly accessible, or definitely going across the internet's not secure. So that's one of the common problems that we see as far as collaborating with board members. Between organizations and their board members. Then, of course, there's committee collaboration. You have the typical board meeting, but oftentimes you end up having subcommittees. There might be standing committees that are like long, you know, the committees that are basically in the charter of the board. And you might have ad hoc committees that are short-term, purpose-driven, just a single purpose, that are a one-time kind of purpose. So we'll talk about that a little bit. and some pros and cons of different options there. The other thing is continuity through board member transitions. Now, this isn't necessarily just a transition on or off the board, but that's applicable too. It's a transition between committees potentially, especially as a nonprofit. If you're on the board of a nonprofit, you may serve on different committees through your board tenure in that organization. And one of the challenges is, how do you have the continuity of information as you collaborate over time? And so by using some of these tools that we're going to talk about, that'll help you at least make that information readily available to new board members that are transitioning in or out of those roles. Remote participation in board and committee meetings. Well, that is more applicable today than it was a few months ago. But I've talked to another one of my colleagues who serves on several boards, and he loves it. He's saying that, why I used to travel and drive 4 hours round trip in order to go to a board meeting just because of where he lives. And now I can just participate in my own office at home via video and still have access to all the information. We're probably used to working remotely now for those of us listening in today or listening in the future. But how do you do that securely so that you know that the information that you're sharing is also not being, it's not also out in the wild? So, and just making it easy to be able to connect and collaborate virtually. All right, then one of the other things that I know I struggled with is as a communication to a board member is that there's events that are board meetings. Those are easy. Those are typically something that a calendar invite is sent out, and that's put on my calendar. But what about the other events? Different maybe fundraising events or other company events that are pertinent or important that as a board member I should be aware of, but I didn't necessarily want on my calendar. Meaning an invitation that wasn't necessarily sent out. So how can you maybe publish and communicate some of that information to a board? Finally, dashboards and reporting. You know, oftentimes this is done just via Excel, but if you're using Power BI, it might be one of the ways in which you use inside of Teams or in your SharePoint site in order to share during board meetings. One of the things we'll catch is there's some gotchas about sharing PowerPoint, or excuse me, not PowerPoint, Power BI dashboards or reports to guests, and it depends on some licensing and or setup that you have on your side. So there's some pieces there that are idiosyncrasies. We're not going to get into those details today, but I'll show you what I mean as far as being able to at least pull up a Power BI dashboard if in the middle of maybe a board meeting, for example. So we'll talk about some of these things as far as enabling communication of the effective information that you really need to communicate and collaborate with a board of directors in a secure fashion. That's the key. There's a lot of ways to do this, but not necessarily in a secure way. So we're going to talk about that from a security perspective. Okay, now that we've talked about some of the common problems, let's actually get into demonstrating some of the key pieces of this. Now, I've already built out some of these pieces, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. Inside of Teams, in fact, actually, I'll pull up Teams here really quick. So inside of Teams, what I've done is I went ahead and created a board of directors team down here, okay? And I built out a few sub-channels to illustrate some of the points that we want to talk about today. Let me flip over my notes here just to make sure I'm not missing anything important. So I've already built out a little bit of a structure here that might be pertinent as far as, you know, the general channel that exists. Finance committee is oftentimes a standing committee as part of a board. Strategic planning is oftentimes a standing committee, but it also might be just something that you do once every few years, depending on how your board engages with that. And then I made a private channel just to illustrate some things here as far as board governance and search. I just happened to make that a private one. Hypothetically speaking, if maybe you only wanted your board chair or the president of the organization or other internal members to be part of, you could also create a private channel. So I just created a basic structure from which we can dig into and kind of look at some of the key pieces here. So first of all, emailing financial documents. For those of you who are familiar with O365, you're already familiar with places where you can go as far as if you click up here into the files section. And what that might look like. There's some different folder here where you might be able to have meeting minutes that are approved, upcoming meeting agenda. Maybe this is your meeting agenda template. But I'm actually going to go ahead and go over here and open this up in SharePoint. And I'm hoping that pops up in that browser. Good. So this basically is the board of directors site. I'm actually going to go back to the root at the documents level because just to show you that these are the different committees that I've basically created, or the channels that I've created. So as you know, just like you can collaborate internally with team members, this is a way where if you create guests, you can give them access to this information. So if I click back into general, and let's say you wanted to look at past meeting minutes that are approved, you've got PDFs that are published here for past meeting minutes, you know, the 2020 March board agenda meeting minutes, they're there, or just maybe the current agenda for this month's or this quarter's board meeting. So these are just ways in which you can collaborate and you can access guests. Now, I'm going to go back to Teams really quick, just to illustrate the point. Is one of the prerequisites that you have to worry about. And I'm going to go to the little breadcrumbs here, right? So you see that there, and I'm going to manage team. So this is one of the ways where you, if you're, say, the one of the main liaisons between the organization and the board, or maybe you're the president of the organization or the CEO, depending on what your title is, or executive director, you're probably going to be the owner of the board of directors team. So as an owner, when you click on, you can create and manage the team. So notice, so let's say at this moment I'm the executive director or the president of the organization that's responsible for engagement with the board. I actually have added, gone up here and added member, and then I was able to add multiple guests. So this is Stephanie's MyTech account. This is Stephanie's demo account, which is in the MTP 365 tenant that you can see, or the account that we have here. So, and you can see if they're a guest or a member by the fact that right after their name it's listed as guest. You can also see over here that they're a guest. So adding the member here, you're not able to add guests until first and foremost, and this is an administrative function, not a power user function. One of the things that we've been working on to help educate our clients and prospects and community members about O365 is there's different levels of permissions that you can extend through Office 365. This one that I'm talking about here is an administrative level setting. It's someone that you're going to want to ask us to help you create this, to create the backend permissions, or someone like, or whoever your administrator is if it's not MyTech. And we can basically create the structure to allow you and enable adding guests to the team, to allow those guests to be able to collaborate with documents and share documents and edit documents if that's what you choose, to allow them to have access to the SharePoint site, to potentially allow them to synchronize data via OneDrive even, for instance. But you first and foremost have to permission that so that the board of directors team site, because you don't have to allow it for every single team in your organization, you can lock it down specifically to this team site, so that when you, if you're the executive director or the president or the CEO, can come in here, you can add the respective board members here. So, you know, we could add, you know, Gerald, for example. In fact, I would, just to give example of, do mytech.com, for example. So notice I've got Gerald as an account on this tenant, and I've got Gerald's MyTech account. So I could then add, this won't even show up. It won't even allow me to see the guest possibilities until after I've created that permissions. Otherwise, it's only going to look internally. So that's an illustration of what you can do. You got to create that backend structure first, because by default, Microsoft 365 does not allow external sharing. It does that very much on purpose so that you don't unintentionally share things externally that you don't want to be shared externally. So that's one of the key reasons why that's an important prerequisite before you start that. So once you've set the team permission so that you can allow guests, as the owner of that team, you can come in and you can add members to the team, add members or guests. Members are going to be internal members of your team, like maybe you're a financial person or maybe an operations person, etc. And then guests would be board members, right? So that's the start. Next, again, part of that too is choosing, can they edit files? Can they have access to SharePoint? All those things. So those are the things you permission. Once you've done that, as you add them, all those permissions basically apply. The other thing that I do like to call out is this tab here. Again, once you're in the manage team, if you click over into settings, here's some of the things you can choose as far as guest or member permissions. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this little arrow here. I've actually unchecked a bunch of these because I do want, I don't know if I want members to create or update channels. So I'm going to actually unselect this one right here because I don't want members to be able to create a channel. I want to keep the channels based on committees. I want to keep that structure organized so that we don't have a channel sprawl. So as an owner, I have to make sure that I'm involved before that's created. I also unchecked, I don't want them to delete or restore channels. I don't want them to add or remove apps. I don't want them for custom apps. There's things that I can choose as far as what I may or may not want them to do. I might create, update, or remove tabs. I'm actually going to select this one because if they want to add a tab as far as a subcommittee, I'm perfectly fine with that. Again, I don't want them to remove connectors, which could be like third-party applications. I don't want them to be able to delete their messages, but I don't mind having them be able to edit their messages, which, that's really a choice for your part, right? So those are member permissions that you might consider. And again, those are internal people, not the board members. This will be internal members of your team. And then from a guest perspective, it doesn't give you a whole lot of options. It doesn't really allow you to even do channel creation. Like, I think I turned that off because when I turned off, I'm guessing when I turned off this permission here, and I'll actually click that again and you'll see what I mean. When I go down to guests, it actually then enables this drop down here that can say enabled guests to create and update channels. So I don't want to allow that because I don't want the guests to be able to do that. But that gets you an idea of some of the settings you can create as you're trying to build the structure for the communication collaboration hub for your board of directors. Okay, so I'm going to get out of this. So I'm going to go back to the general channel here. And of course, in the general channel, again, you might have different ways in which you're engaging and creating file structures here. Of course, this is in SharePoint. One of the things that you have to choose, but you can actually enable your board to sync. So for instance, if I'm a board member and you're sharing boarding meeting minutes, or if you're sharing financial information, or if you're sharing strategic information, I can choose to sync this to my OneDrive based on that permission so that I could be able to review and prepare or participate if the meeting is being held virtually. Of course, you can open it in SharePoint as you're used to, but that's some of the basics as far as the meeting collaboration. Now, from a standing committee or ad hoc committee, I did want to show a few different things. So moving on to the that next one is if this is the finance committee, again, many of you have already, if you're using O365 or if you're not familiar with this, but you can have you can have this channel, you can create a channel, and by default, everyone in the team will be part of this channel. And of course, you can share files. I also created, for instance, one of the things you can do is when you create a team, by default, it actually creates a OneNote notebook. So I just added that as a tab up here at the top, and I created a meeting and agenda notes for this particular committee. You can do that in OneNote if you'd like. You could do it in Word. You could do it in the wiki even, as far as just a note-taking document. So there's different ways in which you could create notes. Now the thing, if you're having your official board meeting, I know one of the things you have to be careful of is you have to keep accurate minutes, and then you have to save those minutes and approve the minutes from the previous meeting. That's kind of natural board process and procedure. And so keeping those in a OneNote notebook for archival purposes is probably not the best way to go. But for committee meetings, when you want to maybe just have historical information and be able to have reference for past members and current members, just using a OneNote notebook might work really, really well. So that's one of the ways you could do that. I also created, again, an example of a private channel. One of the things I want to show you here is I'm going to switch over to the web browser. If you notice, I'm going to kind of pull this off to the side here a little bit. I'm going to go to the documents. If you notice that the folders that are created here in the SharePoint site are general, mapping to general, finance committee, mapping to finance committee, and strategic planning, mapping to strategic planning. These folders are created when I create those sub channels. Why, however, is the private channel not existing? You don't see that here. Well, very specifically because it creates a private channel. So I'll give you an illustration, and I'll go into the private channel by clicking over here. I'm going to click into files again, and then I'm going to open in SharePoint, and you'll see what I mean, because this will allow me to, there's nothing here yet from a file perspective, but it'll give me the open in SharePoint opportunity. So I'm going to click open in SharePoint. What it's going to do, it's going to open up another tab there, and you'll see how this is Board of Directors. I'm going to switch back over to this other tab. So this is the Board of Directors team site. And since this is a private channel, what it does, it creates it as Board of Directors - Board Governance and Search. But this basically is its own subsite that has its own structure and its very specific permissioning of whomever you might add to that private channel. So that's one of the things that I always like to call out when you're looking at your team structure here versus seeing you're actually using a private channel. So just know that the way the private channel works, not saying it's the right or wrong answer, just saying be aware of that, because by default, when you create these channels, Everyone who's a member of the board of directors team has access to these channels, but if you need or want to create a private channel, you can do that, but know that it kind of creates its own substructure. It's easy to navigate. Again, you can come into Teams and click open in SharePoint, not a big deal, but it's just something for you to be aware of. And I'll show you one other way in which you might choose to do committee meetings or standing meetings is you can do, like, for instance, if you have an ad hoc committee, this might be a good way to do it. Not necessarily, I could see where you might want to have maybe an ad hoc committee channel where that's just where your ad hoc committees meet. There's some different capabilities that you have between channels and chat, but one of the things that you could do is you come up here to chat is I actually created this short-term ad hoc committee. I just went in, I basically went up here, created new chat, and then I added, so I'll show you who I can, over here by clicking here, I can show you who's members. I've added these people, so I've had internal members and guest members. This is my wife, by the way. I just use her email unbeknownst to her as far as a test. So she probably gets random emails from me from time to time and wondering what they are. But I've added these people to the ad hoc chat, and I've renamed the chat by clicking this little edit button here. I've renamed it short-term ad hoc committee chat, just to illustrate the point. So this is the beginning of our chat. You know, I was able to, as a guest, get this chat and comment back. And then the other thing that I did to show you an illustration of what might be interesting if you have a short-term committee chat just in a chat, you still probably want to share files in the SharePoint site. So what I've done is I've created a link here at the top. I clicked Add Tab, and then I clicked the website option, and then I just copied and pasted the link to our board of directors site. So that's how this came about. So I click on that, and it's actually just going to pull up a link to our board of directors site. It's going to ask me to log in. Sorry about that. 65.com. I tested it. It didn't ask me to log in, but now it's asking me to log in again. So sorry about that. The reason for this, that I illustrate putting this link, is because what it does is this is an easy way to create a shortcut to potentially these documents, right? So if I wanted to create, for instance, and I'll go ahead and do it just by illustration, new folder, and I'm actually going to create a folder called ad hoc committee files. So now what I can do is I can actually create a link. So it's really easy, and I could probably link directly to this folder structure up here, but I can basically then link to here, and this is where I could be storing our ad hoc committee files. So now they're in SharePoint, they're backed up in SharePoint, and holding the chat here. So this is just different ways to think about it if you have just a short-term ad hoc committee that needs to chat versus building out a channel structure for your board of directors. I'm not saying which way is right or wrong. It's just important for you to understand the nuances and the differences depending on how you want to interact with your board members or external, external advisors. Okay, so that's on standing committees or ad hoc committees. And by the way, so the same thing applies by using this structure, in particular by using the channel structure. This is, if you want to really retain information historically, I would recommend using this structure in Teams under the channels as opposed to using ad hoc chat, because you can easily add people and change out membership in these different channels or committees, and all of the historical information is retained. So if I'm a new board member that's coming on board, or if I'm transitioning from one committee to the next, I have access to all of the historical information that might exist here. Again, I didn't put really any information in all the channels, just giving you illustrations, but I would have access to all the historical information, meeting recordings if there were meeting recordings, files and minutes, etc. And even dashboards. So that's one of the things that I've learned. It's being able to have that historical tenure by keeping it in this place. It allows not only people to collaborate, but have historical information. And then, of course, by meeting virtually, you can very easily just host these meetings right here by clicking, in fact, I'm going to go over to the Teams. I have Teams in the web browser pulled up here. So you can meet down here in the web browser or in Teams by clicking Meet Now, and this is where you could just host your, I'll continue without audio or video because I'm already using it through this, and I could use to say, so June 2020 board meeting. So this is where you can host it. You could also schedule this meeting right here. down here, you can schedule it. So I could actually pull up here, schedule it, pulls up into the calendar, and I can schedule the time, etc. And I can add attendees if I want. So this is where I can schedule it. And then when it goes out from an invitation perspective, all they have to do is click on the link in the invite, and that'll open up the Teams meeting. So this is where you can schedule board meetings or hold meetings, even if it's ad hoc meetings, because again, I could just hit meet now. You can also do that if you're an ad hoc committee. So you can do that in any of the channels. Also in chat, you could do that in the ad hoc committee meeting too. I could come down here. I'm sorry, it's actually up here. They have I could either do an audio video call with everyone in this chat as well. And I could just specify that that's where we're going to meet. So virtual meetings. And of course, once you've created that structure, for instance, if you're meeting inside of this channel, you know, and you're logged into Teams, if you've permissioned it as such, again, this is the administrative function I was talking about, your board members can browse the files and they could be looking, you could be sharing your screen, but they could also be opening up files, checking on historical information, all at the same time while you're presenting. So that's actually, this can really enable some great virtual meetings, save your board members a lot of time. And I know there are plenty of board meetings or committee meetings that over my tenure that I wasn't able to make because they were really in person, or maybe they were only an audio call. But if I could have participated via video, if I could have had a better, more interactive capability, I would have been able to present, I would have been able to participate, you know, even in those times I might have had to miss in the past. Okay, so one of the other challenges that I know that I had as a board of directors, and this is a little bit of a tricky one, is possibly being able to create a calendar of events. Now, most of the time, you are going to send out board meetings via calendar invite. So that's not really what I'm talking about, especially as a nonprofit. There's probably a lot of events that you might want your board members to be aware of and or participate in. So one of the things that might be helpful, and I'm going to show you how to do this really quick, is you can create how to create a board site. So if you come in here, it's a little tricky, which is why I wanted to demonstrate this, which is different from the other things that I talked about, is notice when you have to be at the root of the site, right? So you're at the root of board of the directors site, so the home, if you will. You can come here to new, click on the drop down, and calendar doesn't show up, but app does. So if you click on app, it'll pull up the different apps that you can integrate. So notice there's a calendar one here. So I'm going to click on calendar, and I'm just going to say this is the board. Yeah, of directors calendar. Go ahead and create that. Okay, so now the board of directors calendar, I'm actually going to come up here before you move. Notice it shows it up here, but what I want it to happen is I want this calendar to show up in the navigation pane, because if it doesn't show up in the navigation pane, it might be harder for my board to be able to find it. So at the next step, I go over to the ellipse here, and I'm going to click on settings right here. So I clicked on the ellipse, little breadcrumbs, and then click on settings. And the very first selection here is where you can add it to the navigation pane. Notice it has list name, description, and navigation. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this. And it's got the name. If I want to change the name, I can. If I want to add a description, but notice say display this list on quick launch. Yes. I can also choose, and this might be something you want to play with, use this calendar to share member schedule. You could choose that or not. I'm going to say no for the moment, just for the sake of this illustration, because really this is what I wanted to illustrate, not this, but you can play around with that. Click save. Now what you'll see is the board of directors calendar used to be underneath the recent, but once I change this setting, it's now part of the navigation. So if I just go back, I'm just going to click on here, which this will take me back to the board of directors homepage, or I could click here. Either one will take me back to the homepage. And now I've got the board of directors calendar that is a link right here in the navigation that I can click on, and from which I could start adding events by just clicking on, let's say I want to add an event coming up next week on the 25th, just click on the day, click add. I think you can also double click, by the way, and then you can just add a title. Now, one of the challenges with this, I'm just going to throw it out there because it's probably a question that's going to come, is that this does not synchronize with other calendars. This is the intent of this would be informational. Notice there's not an opportunity to invite people. And so that if that's your goal, then this function is not really the purpose. I just know that you probably receive emails or field calls if you're someone that's responsible as a board liaison, that if you have information that you want to share with your board and allow them to pick and choose the events that they want to go to, this might be a way you want to do that. And so that's just something to be aware of that you might be able to do if you're trying to publish a board of directors calendar. It might also be that you just share because there's a team group that's created when you create the team site. You could also possibly use that and just use it to send information out and just invite board members. But I just know that as a board member, if I'm not able to make the event, I might not want on my calendar, and there could be a lot of events that I could be invited to or that I'd be welcome to attend that I don't want to have to create the burden of the person inside of the organization to invite every single board member and manage all of that. So that's just one way to potentially create a board of directors calendar that allows the board members to opt in if that's something they're interested or if they want to check out calendar details. Okay, so that's the second to last thing. The last thing that I want to show you is I actually, in this, I would recommend this part from when you're presenting. If you want to make it easy to visualize things, you can actually, I just went up here and added a tab. This is for key performance data. Click the plus. I selected Power BI, and I just added the Power BI dashboard that I'd already created in the past. It's kind of an operations summary. That's going, as you see, it's pulling up Power BI right now. And allows me to then look at different performance metrics that we may have had. So you can create a Power BI dashboard and share that. One of the things that is tricky, and this is one of those back-end administrative things, kind of a public service announcement, is that if you want to share this report with guests, there's basically a couple different ways in which that happens. One of them is if your board member's Microsoft 365 account is licensed for Power BI, it's really easy, no problems. You might not know that though, right? And I wouldn't necessarily count on your board member having a Power BI license in order for them to access this information. So that's probably not the way I'd recommend, but it is kind of an asterisk there. The primary way, if you're really trying to share this with guests, is a back-end administrative function. Basically, there are specific ways in which the user or the guest user needs to be created and permissioned, specifically if you want to share Power BI dashboard data with them. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. So I'm going to go up here, even though I've got it in the tab. So hypothetically speaking, let's say I'm in a board meeting right now and I'm pulling up this tab just to show the metrics. That's something that I, as the executive director, or I, as the person inside the organization leading the meeting, can do. But what if I want to share that with my board members either ahead of the meeting or after the meeting? Well, one of the easy ways to do it by creating this tab up here is I can come over here to the little web icon, this little like world icon, and it says go to website. So I click on that. It's going to open up the web page inside of Power BI, and you'll notice the same thing, the same report pops up as it renders here. And so the same report's popping up, but it's now inside of Power BI instead of inside of Teams. And just like in many areas of Office 365, you see this little share icon over here. So you can easily click share, and you can actually share this information with people outside the organization. You could choose not to allow them to share, etc. There's things you can do here, and here's the report link. So there's things that you can share, but in order for them to view, that's where that back-end administrative function has to be set. So when your board member might click on this, they would actually be able to see it. So that's one of the tricks around if you're wanting to share Power BI dashboards, but it could be a very powerful way, at the very least, to be able to present the information if you're in a board meeting or a committee meeting where you're trying to share financials, key production reports, fundraising efforts and results, if that's something that if it's for a nonprofit, for example. But those are different ways to be able to share those metrics. So that is pretty much the summary. I will go back to the summary slide again. I always like to put like a one pager here as far as, hey, look, if you're trying to share confidential information, you can use SharePoint, Teams Site, and OneDrive. Committee collaboration can be Teams channels, private channels, document libraries. You could also use an ad hoc chat, by the way, as I mentioned. Continuity, where you can retain historical files and communication. Teams meeting for secure remote participation in board meetings. You can publish a team site calendar, and you can use Power BI dashboards for board visibility. So, not all of these you have to use, but these are some of the common problems that I know that I experience as a board member, and a lot of our nonprofit members that we work with talk about and struggle with this, and being able to effectively communicate and collaborate with their board. So if just pick one or two of these. If there's any of these that resonate with you, or some problems you're trying to solve, identify those. Maybe there's some takeaways here. Again, some of these things that we're talking about require some back-end administrative work that, unless you're the admin of your O365 account, you're not going to be able to enable some of this stuff. So either connect with someone like MyTech or your internal IT that has that capability, or your provider. And again, we're always here to help. In the meantime, take a few steps and see if you can figure some things out, or work with us, or start up a conversation. Whatever those next steps are for you, we welcome you to take those, whether it's with us or on your own. And finally, by all means, please join us. We have every week. We are taking the week of the week leading up to 4th of July off, by the way. So we're not going to be doing one on the 30th, I think, of June. But we have events planned out all the way into early August. Those will be published on our website. You'll get an email link with those shortly. And then also on July 9th, we are hosting our monthly Power user group. Again, as I talked about the permissions, some of these permissions are back-end administrative functions. The next layer is the Power user functions, and the next layer is like a team member or team owner function. So there's kind of different tiers. The Power user group is kind of that middle tier. We're going into that. Our monthly session on July is July 9th. So we welcome you to that as well, and to share it. So with that said, that is the end of the session today. I know that was, again, a prescriptive overview of how to solve some of those common problems, but I'd love, for those of you who have to drop off, thanks for attending and spending your time with us. For those that can stick around, love to open it up for some Q&A. Stephanie?